All right. Well, good afternoon, Shane. How you doing, man?
Doing great. What about you, Shannon?
I'm all right. I'm all right. I woke up very early this morning, but it's all good. You know,
Well,
got work to
that
do.
means that it was a productive day then, right?
Right, right, right. We're on the move. But yeah, man. I just thought we talk about federalism versus statehood, and sort of where our country is now versus uh, when it was founded. You know,
Mhm.
what were the founding fathers thinking of when they um, you know when they envisioned uh, a former colony of the United Kingdom to be independent? You know,
Yeah.
um, um, what were their what was running through their mind? Uh, you know, of course, I know that it started out as 13 colonies. We had 13 colonies, and you know, now this is just going off of what I know. So you have to help me out as we go along. What I remember, right? And that you know each region on the East Coast had its different sort of economic setups, right? And it and
Hmm.
it's and it's and it's and I want to say political setups too, right? If I'm correct,
Definitely.
yeah, and that that the sort of the New England colonies, you know, were had a different sort of cultural milieu than say the central part of the United the center colonies like Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Jersey, New York,
Hmm.
what have you, right? And then there's the southern states, right? But now the question is, did they all believe that our country should be set up to have all the power, of government be in one place, or did they, were there conflicting views about how, you know, what power should be given to the states, or and what power should be, how much power the central government should have, right? Um, that's a question I have.
Okay, so I think we need to go back a little bit further than
Okay,
that to really set the stage.
okay,
You know,
okay.
for a lot of people, at least the way it's normally presented in school, at least the way it was presented to me in school was that you had the medieval period and you had feudalism and everything, which was
Mhm,
very authoritarian, very very top down. If the king in the faraway city said bark,
mhm.
you know, uh, or said that he wanted all the peasants to start barking, then they would just start barking.
Right,
If he told
right.
all the peasants to jump, then they would just ask how high. That, and this was just a big uniform thing that, like in France,
Mhm,
when the king uttered some crazy statement of what he wanted everyone to do in the country from Paris,
mhm.
then everybody in France all bowed down and did whatever he wanted them to do.
Right.
If you wanted them all to wear polka dots on Thursdays, then by goodness, that's what they all had to do. Well, that's
Right.
actually not the way that things operated during the medieval period and during the feudal times.
Okay.
Um, there was a philosophical and kind of like a theological and philosophical tradition, actually kind of like two that come down from from Aristotle and from the early church.
Mhm,
One the concept of natural law,
mhm,
meaning that there is a natural order of things, and then the
mhm.
other one being the principle of what you call subsidiarity. And
Okay.
subsidiarity, I think, was coined by Thomas Aquinas.
Okay.
And what it says is that anything that the governance must be done at the localist level possible,
Okay. Mhm,
in order for it to be in accordance to the natural law. So an example would be, let's say, maintaining uh, the enforcement of property rights in a country.
mhm.
Well, you can look at it and say, well, a central government can do that. A regional or like a state government could do that. But what what the principle of subsidiarity would say is that it can be administered at the local level, and therefore it must be administered at the local level. The reason is that it's this whole idea that governments are kind of they're kind of instituted to they're instituted to protect the rights that are inherent as a result of the natural law to all human beings.
Okay.
And if those governments and if the government is transgressing the natural law, then the people have the right to kind of seek new leadership. Now that might be in the form of keeping the government in place and working to put new leaders in, or it might be some kind of an overthrow of that government and the formation of a new government.
Right.
And if you look very carefully at the American Declaration of Independence, I wasn't getting on a rabbit trail, but if you look really carefully at the American Declaration of Independence, it says, I have it pulled up, but I don't have it pulled up, but I'm just paraphrasing here. It says that governments are instituted among men to protect their natural rights.
Right.
Well, that entire concept, the founding fathers did not invent that. That concept comes down from Aristotle and from the church fathers, and was really enshrined in Christendom. This whole notion that there is a natural law that all humans are subject to, and legitimate government. The way you know government is legitimate is that it reinforces the natural law, which says that, and some of it has developed over time, but what it says is that every human being, just for the sake of being a person, has dignity and deserves to live, and deserves to have a certain set. And just by right of being born a human person, they have a right to certain, well, they possess certain, as the founders would say, inalienable rights, right?
Right.
That you don't even have the right to give those rights up.
Right.
And no other human has a right to take those things away from you.
Right.
And so I think I might have gone.
So those rights, the American founders would say is the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? That would be their
right.
That would be what they meant by having inalienable rights, or the dignity of the human person is incorporated in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah, what they would say is that those things are, humans having a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Or if you look at the early drafts of the Declaration of Independence, instead of pursuit of happiness, what it says is property. Because and what the whole line of thinking there was that if you're pursuing happiness, kind of entwined in that is your ability to accumulate your own private property. And it doesn't have to be a piece of land, but it would be the idea that you would have the right to own stuff, to own things, tools, whatever it is, and for those things to be yours, and for no other human to have a right to take those from you. So
okay.
So the thing is, it's really interesting how and that is one of the things that's kind of, in my mind, that's the line of demarcation between the French Revolution and the American Revolution, is that the French Revolution was saying that that they were founding a brand new system, that they were innovating what it meant to be a human. They were coming up with this whole new system. They wanted to eliminate the 7-day week. They wanted to eliminate all this stuff.
Right.
overturn, you know, they called it the ancient regime that they were overthrowing. The
Right.
entire previous way of doing things they were getting rid of. You know, there were some French revolutionaries that they even wanted to eliminate property, that they wanted
Right.
to eliminate property rights and things.
Right.
And
Right.
that was because they were categorically rejecting the entire notion of natural law and
Right.
subsidiarity.
Right.
And in the American Revolution, what they were saying was that the tyrant King George III had had uh had had overstepped his bounds in the sense that he had obstructed their right to subsidiarity, and he had also violated the word violated is what I meant to say, and that he had violated the natural law,
Right. Right.
and therefore they had the right to throw that yoke off of themselves and reconstitute a government that would protect their inalienable rights.
Right. Now, okay. Now, incorporated in this though is the question of the divine right to rule. Right. Like, what you know okay, so the French Revolution, the French thinkers and intellectuals and the bourgeoisie class, are beginning to question the idea of the divine right to rule, right? That the king is not divine, or he doesn't have the divine right to rule, right? Uh, he's not blessed by God or anointed by God to rule. Um, and so are the founding fathers, and colonialists here in the United States, are they beginning to believe the same thing, say under King George? They say, man, this dude, he's taxing us real hard. They're putting up. I believe that the British put up tariffs, right, in
Yeah,
which they wouldn't allow for the colonies to sell directly to other people, but they had to funnel all their, you know, manufactured goods back to like the motherland, right,
yeah.
to London.
They only wanted the colonies producing raw goods, you know,
Right.
and then they wanted all the raw goods going back to merry old England. And
Right.
and then you know, the big manufactured good at that time were textiles.
Okay.
You know, so the main thing they wanted was cotton produced in the South,
Mhm.
and then that cotton processed in the North and then shipped to England
Right.
for that cotton to be made into clothing, and then
Right.
export and then sold and exported throughout the world.
Right. Right. Yeah. Cotton, sugar,
Yeah, sugar.
tobacco.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and all that kind of stuff. But you know,
Right.
it's interesting because the divine right of kings. I think the political philosopher who first really articulated that concretely was I think his last name was Rogers, and
Rogers. Okay.
I think he was English.
Okay.
And it's because the divine right of kings didn't come about until after the Reformation.
Ah. Okay.
Because the thing is, remember that a king was consecrated by the bishop, or
Mhm.
or or if they were a big king, you know,
Mhm.
they'd be consecrated by the pope,
Right.
or by the big religious leader. And I'm sure in the East the czars were probably crowned, or you know, they would have to bow before the patriarch,
Right.
or the archbishop or something like that. I'm guessing. I don't know a whole lot about Russian history,
Right.
but
Right.
but you know, the thing is that they didn't have an inherent right to rule
Mhm.
outside of the confession that they made to God,
Right.
that they would uphold the natural law,
Right.
you
Right.
know.
Right. Right.
And that's one of the reasons that people like Aristotle, and then church fathers and things would even say that, you know, the church fathers didn't talk a whole lot about tyrants and who has
Mhm.
the right to rule and everything. A lot of them were trying to stay alive and trying to protect their flocks, you know.
Right.
But
Right. Yeah.
the thing is, well, especially like people like Thomas Aquinas would say that if the people were being tyrannized, if the rulers were depriving the natural law from the people, then there would a certain point would come where the people did have the right to overthrow that ruler and institute a new one. You know, the whole theology and philosophy of divine right of kings says just the fact that that king is born, they have the right to rule no matter what. They can do whatever they want to their people, and their people have no recourse.
Okay.
You know?
So then the you know, we fast forward to the United States says, okay, we don't want King George anymore, right? Like he's a tyrant, you know. Okay, and then there's something here, man. Do you think that the founding fathers were actually turning against the king, or they were turning against powerful people who had control over the government? You know, say they had the king's ear, because I don't think I think by that time, Great Britain had a parliamentary system, and the king.
Oh yeah, they did.
Yeah, the king didn't really make a lot of decisions in terms of government. He sort of by that time a symbolic figure, but they used, I think maybe the government used the symbol of the king as a way to take advantage of the political and economic situations, say in the in the United States, right? But okay, so when do they begin to question the idea of a federal government versus statehood, right? Like when does that sort of battle take place? Because I've heard people say, well, what's his name? Man, I'm not gonna get too many points for not knowing some of the founding fathers' names, but
describe him. Are you talking about like Thomas Jefferson or like
Thomas Jefferson, and then the founding father who wanted to set up the reserve, like the bank.
Oh, Alexander Hamilton.
Yeah, Hamilton, right? So these are two, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is me trying to muster up some of my American history, right? Jefferson was sort of against a federalist government, or government having more power than the states, and Hamilton was much more interested in having a federal government. He wanted a central bank. He wanted a standing army, right? Like a standing military.
Yep.
And I guess, he sort of won out. Hamilton sort of won out in that regard, right? We ended up having a standing army.
And even further, what the anti-federalists, so you had two camps. You had the federalists and you had the anti-federalists, right? And when we hear the word federal, we think of federal government and we think of big government. That's not what they meant back then. So a federalist was someone who supported multiple layers of government, like a federal government that was very, very limited in scope. Yeah, that basically if the Constitution does not directly give them the power, then they don't have it, plain and simple. And then the state government would have more power than the federal government does, but then the lion's share of the power would reside at the local level.
Okay.
Following along with that principle of subsidiarity, that was just in the ether among European intellectuals, because so many of them had either been influenced by the writings and thinking of Thomas Aquinas, or they had been influenced by people who had been influenced by the writings and thinking of Thomas Aquinas. So the thing is, so you had the Federalists, and then you had the Anti-Federalists who supported a layered government, of multiple governments basically competing for power, just like the Federalists. But the Anti-Federalists would say that that we must limit the powers that are delegated to the central government
Mhm.
even more than what the Federalists wanted to advocate for. So the anti-federalists might be against like a post office, or they might be against, they might be, you know there would only be a handful of things that the Federalists would support the federal government having the power to do, and
Mhm.
then the anti-federalists would support maybe 25% of those things.
Right.
You know,
Right. Okay. Okay. And so now, is there, is there a sort of geopolitical split, happening there too? Like, say the North seems to be much more pro-federal government, right?
mm-hmm.
And then the South, I don't know how true that is, but
Yeah,
they kind of, when you learn about American history, they try to kind of put it like that, like, oh, the North was much more pro-federal government, the South was much more pro-statehood, powers being in the state. And then, I've heard it kind of put this way, you know, it's because the South wanted to, we talk about um, the pursuit of property, right?
yeah,
Well, some people say, well, they would use that argument uh, to say, well, slaves are our property, right? So we have the pursuit to property. Well, they're our property. So why should we? Why 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 is that not included? You know what I mean?
well, it's ironic that the Southern leaders
Mhm.
wanted to, because slavery did come up among the founding fathers,
Mhm.
and a lot of them, people like Jefferson, would say that slavery was obviously the concept of it was a complete and total contradiction to everything to the founding philosophy of the country.
Mhm.
The notion that you could buy a human being and treat a human being as if they were property.
Mhm.
But the ironic thing is that a lot of these so a lot of the founders of the country that were big proponents for maintaining slavery, a lot of them being Southerners, but not all of them. You had a lot of slavery in the North too.
Mhm.
Excuse me. But they wanted to have their cake and eat it too. What they wanted was to maintain the institution of slavery, where they bought and sold people as property.
Mhm.
Um, and they also wanted for them to count in the census, which allocated congressional representatives. So so
Mhm.
so they wanted to count that's where the whole thing, the 3/5 compromise, comes in. In
Okay.
in the Constitution, it says that enslaved peoples would count in the census
Mhm.
as 3/5 of a person.
Right. Mhm.
So for every 5 enslaved persons you had,
Mhm.
they would count on the census as being 3 actual people,
Mhm. Mhm. Okay. And then,
which was reprehensible.
right.
That's denying personhood.
Yeah.
That's denying personhood rights.
Right.
And the founders were not oblivious to this, but what a lot of the founders would say was basically, we're just gonna put this is gonna be for the next generation to figure out, or this is gonna be for the next
Right.
generation to solve. Really what they should have done was abolish the institution of slavery immediately.
Right.
That's what they should have done, because what they should have said is, this is a violation of the natural law.
Yeah.
Which it doesn't matter if you're somebody who is a Christian or not a Christian. It doesn't matter who you are.
Mhm.
Every human being, just by right of being born a human,
Mhm.
you are entitled to the rights of the natural law that guarantee your personhood rights. You know.
Right. Right.
But this is the thing. The founders saw that it was a walking contradiction.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
frankly, not to be too this might be a little bit too bold of a statement for YouTube, but a lot of them didn't, they were ballsy in a lot of ways, and then they were not ballsy in other ways. And none of them, none of them had the cojones to really take on the institution of slavery. They were able to take on the banking establishments and stuff at the time and keep that in check for a while. Not for too long.
Yeah.
But they didn't take on they didn't take on slavery. Yeah, and that ended up when you look back at American history, what you end up seeing is that slavery, which was a denial of personhood rights to human beings, a gross violation of the natural law, that was the thing that ended up undermining subsidiarity in the country. And the problem is, it was such a messy situation, because what do you do in that situation as a country? The whole, because so actually here let me back up. So the word nation does not appear in the Constitution.
Okay.
The word union does. Okay. So what a lot of historians will argue is that the United States entered the Civil War, which was fought for many reasons, but the reason that was the reason that the war ended on was was abolishing slavery. But most historians will say that the United States entered the Civil War as a union of states, and that at the Civil War's conclusion, the United States was no longer a union of states; it was a nation.
Is that because the federal government had sort of forced that union to take place by absorbing the southern states into
because prior to the Civil War, every American was considered a citizen of their state. You were a Virginian, you were a New Yorker, you were a whatever you call people from Alabama, and so on and so on. But after the Civil War, it was the 14th Amendment, I think, that naturalized every American as a U.S. citizen instead of being a citizen of your state. So it changed the entire dynamic in the country. And what the argument in favor of that was they would argue that the only way that the federal government could eliminate the institution of slavery was to naturalize every American as a citizen of the federal government, and then the federal government would have the ability to eliminate slavery and to prevent it from ever appearing in the country as the years would go by.
Right.
Now, it's ironic that doesn't apply to conscription. You had to register in the selective service, and so did I. Whenever we hit 18.
Right. you don't have a choice in getting shot up.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. But now, see, I guess so the thing with being federal versus state, that whole conflict starts to, of course, I guess its climax is the Civil War.
Right.
But people don't, whenever they talk about American history, people don't focus a lot on the fact that like more than half of this country weren't under the British. They weren't British colonies.
Right.
The central part of this country, from, I guess, like Michigan all the way down to like Louisiana was a French colony. And then you have like the western part of the country, which was controlled by Spain. Um, and so, you know, would they have had different, once they get, of course, we had different wars, or purchases
Oh yeah.
to, to get
Well, and you see, the anti-federalists
Mhm.
were against the Louisiana Purchase,
Why is that?
the reason that they were was they said that the only way that you could maintain a republic is if it was small geographically.
Okay.
Because the thing that they would argue is they would say, you look back at a place like Athens, which Athens was not a republic in the sense as we understand it. Athens was a democracy, but Athens didn't become an authoritarian empire until they started expanding. They started expanding beyond their little part of the world.
Right.
And same thing with Rome. Same thing with the Babylonians, same thing with the Assyrians. It's when when your country crosses the threshold from being a small regional power to being a massive, like, continental empire, the government has a very different relationship with its people. And a lot of the founders were very aware of that, especially the anti-federalists who were opposed to Louisiana Purchase. And it's so ironic. Side note: Thomas Jefferson was a man of contradictions. He hated Europe, but he had the biggest collection of European wine in North America.
Right. He spoke French.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, spoke French, but hated a lot of he hated French aristocrats. He was opposed to banking and credit for the most part, but it was under his presidency that the United States catapulted herself into debt to borrow money to buy the Louisiana Territory.
Wow.
And all of Thomas Jefferson's collaborators, people that thought the same way he did, were looking at him and thinking to themselves, what in the world is this guy doing? This guy's crazy.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons that Jefferson was a brilliant thinker, philosopher, and everything, but even Jefferson would say that he was not a very good statesman. On Jefferson's grave, he specifically didn't want his presidency listed as one of his accomplishments because Jefferson viewed it as being an abject failure.
Yeah.
And
at least
in many ways, I agree with him on that. Not entirely.
Right. But, at least he knew politics was nothing but a swamp. You know what I mean? A swamp of a mess. You know what I mean? But yeah.
Well, and back to where I think you were leading was that the French and Spanish they understood race differently, differently than the English did. Now, did they understand race in a perfect way? I'm guessing they probably didn't, but the thing is that you end up, it's really interesting because in the places where the Spanish settled and where the French settled, you end up seeing a lot of a lot of mixed marriages. A lot of interracial relationships.
Right.
The Mexican people are a perfect example of that, where the Spaniards intermarried with the natives,
right.
and the Mexican people are the result of that. In fact, I learned the other day that they call themselves the cosmic people, because they view Our Lady of Guadalupe as being like the mother of the Mexican people, and she has stars behind her on the tilma. Yeah, the picture. The picture of her. It's stars behind her. So the Mexican people, I guess that I'm guessing in Spanish they call themselves the cosmic people after Our Lady of Guadalupe.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it is interesting how their relationship to race, the I know, for instance, like the French had the whole idea of the Code Noir, where the law that you know you know European men and say enslaved women or vice versa, they could be together under, but they had to have like a sanctioned marriage, like a Catholic,
Mhm.
be married within the church and everything, and of course, like with the French Louisiana, southern New France, I guess is what it's
Yeah.
called. They had, uh, you know, there were lots of marriages between various groups. The French traders and stuff like that, and enslaved Africans and Native Americans. And that brought about the Louisiana Creole culture,
Yeah.
and the Cajun culture, where the Acadians from Quebec come down, to live in Louisiana, you know. So yeah, it was a very, very different relationship. But as time moves on, how do these states want to incorporate themselves, into the union, right? I mean, do they want to be seen as like separate states, like we don't
Mhm.
want the government to encroach on our rights and whatnot, or do they want to
S-
be?
So,
Yeah.
so first of all, I think it's really important to to note relating to what you were mentioning about race. The English had a notion of race that was very, very clear and concrete, that one of racial superiority,
Mm,
and they wanted to maintain racial purity because their race is was the fundamental was it was a part of it was a fundamental part uh of the organizing principle of their society.
mm,
They would build walls to keep themselves separate from the Native Americans.
okay.
And then the British would later on bring apartheid to South Africa.
Right.
And they, and then you look at the way that they left India and Pakistan. The British were all about keeping races separate because they viewed race as being maybe not necessarily the fundamental organizing principle of society, but one of the key principles by which you organize society.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the French and the Spanish, as flawed as they were, because they were certainly not perfect,
Mm-hmm.
um, they viewed race as being just as being more of a minor principle on the scale of organizing a society.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the reasons that it was in St. Augustine here in Florida that the first marriage occurred, or we have the first record of the first marriage that occurred in North America,
Right.
and that was between I think it was between a Spanish soldier
Mm-hmm.
and and I think an enslaved woman,
Mm-hmm.
an African, a female African slave.
Right. Yeah.
And I think she may have escaped from the she may have escaped south from the British territories, that I'm not sure of. But
Mm-hmm.
it is interesting to note that so the reason I thought it was important to kind of highlight that is that in the American, remember that America, in breaking with Britain, we were not breaking with British tradition.
Okay.
We were not breaking with the way that the British orient themselves to reality and the way that the British think about themselves and everything.
Right.
They were merely breaking with the king because they believed that the king had violated had violated their rights.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, but they, because you think about the way that Britain is. You mentioned that they're a parliamentary system,
Mm-hmm.
and the local cities and I'm guessing counties and things send representatives to the British Parliament, and that's the way it's worked for a very, very long time.
Right.
One of the things that the American colonists were really, really mad about was that they were being taxed without being represented in the Parliament.
Okay.
The whole mantra of taxation without representation, that's where
Right.
that comes from.
Right.
And what they were saying was that King George III was a tyrant, and that King George III was transgressing their right to be represented, to have input on the way that they are taxed.
Right. Right.
So there, because really the colonies didn't really pay any taxes up until that point. Up until the Stamp Act and all that stuff.
Right.
So they actually had it pretty good before the crown started taxing them, and it was when the crown started taxing them that they were very upset about it. Not necessarily that they were being taxed; they were upset that they had no representation, that they were not able to have input. Because they viewed themselves as being good Englishmen, and they viewed the king as having violated their rights as Englishmen.
Right.
So when they broke with the crown and established the United States, they were not breaking with British culture. They were not breaking with the British tradition. They were just merely severing ties with the British government and establishing their own government to protect their rights.
Right. Right. Okay.
That, I think that's a really key thing that's a really key ingredient that got baked into the cake. That's
the cultural dynamic is still there. The sort of Anglophile the Anglophile culture is still heavily embedded in American culture, and
so they were still fundamentally different from the from the Spanish and from the French, and I think that is one of the problems that would end up setting in culturally in America. Is we understood ourselves as having broken with Great Britain,
right?
But for some reason, I think Americans have always been very confused as to what American culture is.
Right. Exactly. Okay. When you think about it, right? Like,
it's fundamentally British. Really. I mean, we speak English,
right?
But it's something that Americans are just. I don't think we are aware of it. I don't think it's something we're conscious of.
Yeah, because everybody sees themselves as being united under the state flag, the Constitution, the fact that we're a union of states, Washington D.C. is the capital, all this stuff, and we sort of see ourselves as the still having that legacy of Britishness without the crown. What I mean?
But it's just, the interesting thing to me is it seems like your average American is not aware of it. It's like we take it for granted. How, and it might just be the fact that our geography does not remind us of our British heritage. Because so much of America is new. I don't think you can help when you're living in really anywhere in Great Britain. The town square was founded like 1,000 years ago or like 1,400 years ago or something. You can't escape it. You've got reminders all around you.
Right.
Here we don't have any geographical reminders that go back beyond 100 years.
Yeah. And then when you that's something, you alluded to the fact that this country is so vast, right? When you think about federalism versus statehood, it's like, how does a government that is its central place of government is in a small little, zone in between two states, Maryland and Virginia. Right. But that's where that little square is the place where everything goes down.
100 square miles, right?
Right.
It's a 10 by 10.
right. And then you think about how sort of the cultural dynamics. I mean, when you think about the 13 colonies, I mean, they're actually not, those states weren't, they're not that big,
Right.
compared to like places like, California or Texas or something like that, just these big states that just they're so massive, right? But their formation, their founding is different. They they had a different upbringing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They had a French upbringing or a Spanish upbringing,
Yep.
and that I think doesn't get talked about a lot. Which, I understand why. There's this need to want to fit every state and every part of this country into a narrative that says we're all Americans, but they all became American at different times. And also, like, the further away you get from the Britishness of
Hmm.
this country, the more different you are. You kind of, because like you talk about the West, right? We talk about Texas, California, whatever. A lot of people went in that direction because they wanted to get away from the government. What I mean?
Yes.
They don't want to be part of that. And and it seems like now today, right, especially coastal regions like here, Northwest, the Pacific Northwest and California, we're all about government. We're all
Yep.
about the federal government.
You're in the belly of the beast, man.
Yeah, yeah. We used to be so, like, get away. I want to get away from there. Now we're just like whatever they say. That's what we do, unless it's somebody we don't like. So somebody who would probably encourage us to be more independent and state like, we don't like that guy, but we want the guy that's gonna try to force everything back together in a sense of unity. But I digress. But you know I think you know we had talked about this in a previous episode. A lot of people in this country are starting to lose their trust in the government. I don't know whether that is locally, or federally, but I'm sure a lot of it has to do with the federal government.
Yeah.
And they're losing their um, sense of the idea that we are one nation. You know what I mean, and that we have uh, we have to, it's a top down thing. You know what I mean? That whatever DC is saying, we got to go along with that. I think people are starting to begin to see, like, man, there's no way that this small little place can govern a vast nation like this, because of those sort of cultural roots that you know that the various regions that we have, they're just different. You know what I mean? They were they were produced out of for different reasons, or came out of they were incorporated into the United States at different times,
Hmm.
and they weren't, like, okay, like we talk about Louisiana or talk about Washington State, or California. They didn't have anything to do with the British War. They weren't concerned about
Right.
that either. You know what I mean? It wasn't something that they were, so I think even that still has something to do with the way people think about, like, the government, and stuff like that. It's like that I'm an American, and I have these inalienable rights,
Mm.
as a citizen, but I don't want to be told what to do. I don't want to be told by the government I have to do this, or you got to pay taxes, and it's got to be this amount, and all this stuff. I think a lot of people are just not down with that. They're not down with that sense of, well, if the president says we have to go to war, well, we got to go to war. He declares war, we have to do that. Uh, you know, or whatever. You know what I mean? They just, I think people are losing their trust in that, and maybe they should. You know what I mean? I mean, maybe we should go back to a sense of locality. And much more.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem is this is a heterogeneous country.
Mm-hmm.
People are you have pockets all over the United States that are radically different from other pockets.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is that the central government, as it grows more and more and more powerful, or a central government, I think a central government can only continue to centralize power if a nation is culturally homogenous,
Right. Mm-hmm.
Because then when you mandate something,
Mm-hmm.
whether it is moral or immoral for you to have the power to mandate it, let's say that you do mandate it,
Mm-hmm.
at least you can have an idea of how the audience will receive it. You can kind of cater it to the audience.
Right.
But if you're mandating something across all 50 states and territories and everything,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to end up upsetting a lot of people across the board. You're
Right.
much better off allowing the people to govern themselves,
Right.
through,
Right.
locally. And then anything that cannot be handled locally
Mm-hmm.
can be handled regionally at the state level. And then anything that can't be handled at that level, pretty much like foreign policy and maybe coining money and a couple other things,
Mm-hmm.
that can be handled at the federal level.
Right.
And
Right.
now I do think that there is a role for the federal government to play in somehow, and I'm not, this is something I still need to hash out a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
but in keeping centralized corporate power in check.
Mm-hmm.
In the world we live in, you don't want to have a miniature federal government and have massive multinational corporations that have private armies and stuff.
Right. Right.
They,
Right.
they can just roll into your community and just force you to do whatever they want you to do.
Yes.
So you do need to have some give and take.
Right.
I think.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it must be, governance must happen at the localist level possible. And it just, and I think what that goes to, I don't think that's just some high-minded philosophical principle. That's a very, very practical, rule that speaks to how human beings operate and behave. Human beings are tribal by nature.
Right.
We tend to like to be around people that speak the same language. We tend to like to be around people that have had the same, similar experiences to us and things. They like to eat the same kind of food that we do and stuff like that. It's interesting because traditionally it had always been more of a geographic thing, but now with the internet and social media and everything, it's really blurred the lines.
Right. Yeah.
You can have people that are really into a very, very niche way of thinking about the world, whether it's philosophically, ideologically, culturally, whatever. And they might be as spread out as any people can be spread out.
Yes. Yeah.
But they're still a tribe,
Right. Yeah. And that's something that I can I'm in accordance with, because I can say, well, yes, I don't really like the political views of where I live, right? But I do like the cultural aspect of where I live,
and the weather Northwest. This time of year too, right?
Yeah, it's the weather. It's one of people people like to pick on me a lot and say, you don't like summer, man. You don't like the heat, and I'm like, no, bro, I'm from Washington. Like I need the coolness of the day. You know what I mean?
Man, listen, you don't know heat until you've been to Florida in August.
Hey, bro, y'all, you can keep it, brother. You can keep it. You guys are welcome anytime. But yeah, it's true. They're just, just out, it's like it doesn't have to be necessarily political. There's just certain
Yeah.
things that, yes, like, you go to a place, and even though it's like, man, I can't stand the governor. He gets on my nerves.
Right.
At the end of the day, that, like, you both like salmon, you both like drinking coffee, and you both like the rain.
Yep. And you like to go out and look at the I think you call them sounds, right? The
Oh yeah, yeah, the pier and stuff like
yeah.
that. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
you like to
yeah,
go out there and you can watch whales and stuff out there and
right,
everything and
right. Yeah, that's we got the mountains and stuff. I enjoy that. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's something I definitely, you know, that's true. It's true that there's a certain commonality, or certain tribalism.
well, and you see that is one of the reasons that I think in America, we are so heterogeneous because
Mhm,
if you just ask your average American, what is American tradition?
mhm,
What does it mean to be an American?
mhm.
What they'll start talking about are things that are absolutely true. Like they'll talk about freedom.
Right,
They'll talk about our founding and overthrowing the tyrannic, the tyrant King George III.
right,
They'll talk about they might talk about fireworks,
right,
and then that's about as far as American tradition goes.
right, right, right.
Then they might start talking about things that are more contemporary, like they might talk about they might identify America as being musical. They might
Mhm.
they might talk about jazz. They might talk about
Right,
rock and roll.
right,
They might talk about disco music. They might talk about
yeah,
Motown. They might talk
yeah,
about new wave. They might
right,
alt rock. They might start
right,
talking about those things.
right.
But you're never going to get one one cohesive answer from anybody when you ask them what does it mean to be an American, or what is the American tradition. You know,
Right,
if you
right, yes,
if
yeah.
yeah,
If you
and
got
if you go and ask a German,
mhm,
you know, there or if you go ask Germans, I think they're going to have a much more cohesive answer. They're going to be able to
right,
talk about what the founding of Germany was. So like
mhm,
the founder of the German, they're probably going to start talking about Charlemagne or something.
right,
And then they'll be able to talk about German music. They'll be able to talk about Wagner and all these things.
right.
And
Until
with the
until they
French,
get a, until they get right. I was going to say, until they get a Frenchman in there, and then they'll say, no, Charlemagne is Charlemagne
yeah,
is ours.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah. No, yeah, it's they have much more of a enmity for another race, for another country, the French
Yeah.
German enmity, as they say. But yes, this country is, yeah, there's so many different cultural dynamics there, because yeah, it's true. Like, you talk about Louisiana or something like that, they're gonna talk about
Right.
music, and the food, and stuff like that. And then you go to somewhere like Arizona, they're gonna have a different uh, definition of what it means to be like an American,
Mhm.
and an Arizonian, or Arizonan. I don't know, the title, but yeah, that's true. And yeah, I mean, that's a fascinating idea. I never really thought about that. You can see, like, everybody has their, you look at a license plate, everybody have their different like, when you look at a state, they have their different things. Like, Florida has the oranges,
Mhm.
the outline of the state. Washington has Mount Rainier in the background. California has California in cursive, red
Yeah.
letters. I don't, I don't know what that is. You know what I mean?
And then
But
Georgia would have a peach.
right, Georgia has a peach.
Yep.
Pennsylvania's got the Liberty Bell.
Yep.
So no, I think they got. I don't know what they got. Something. But anyways, yeah. No, I see what you're saying, and you know, I agree with
And
that.
I think what that does is it lends itself to confusion,
Hmm.
among people. And I think that's one of the reasons that, especially because, it was something that I was thinking about a month ago. I was talking to Nico about this.
Mhm.
That people look back at the 90s
Mhm.
and really like the early 2000s, and they their mouths salivate for that
Mhm.
time, and they look back at it and they say that time it felt so much more comfortable, and it was
Mhm.
just things were so much better, and but they can't,
Mhm.
but if you ask them why, they'll say, oh, the music was so good, or the movies
Right.
were so good, or whatever. But it seems like um back then there was a universal pop culture,
Mhm. Mhm.
and you had you had different factions within this big pop culture. Like you had like the more like pop rock
Mhm.
culture,
Mhm.
like the boy bands and like Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera and stuff.
Right.
Then you had kind of like the rap subset, like Coolio,
Mhm.
and you had like Snoop Dogg,
Yeah.
and then later on you had like Eminem and stuff, and then and then you had like the country music
Mhm.
kind of faction. But the thing is, they were all kind of interrelated because it was all happening at the same time,
Right. Right.
but I think that has to do with the fact that we had like cable television,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
and I think the internet has kind of broken everything up, so in a place like America, the contemporary culture can't really be anything but very factional,
Right.
and there isn't anything unifying those factions anymore, because like back in the 90s, things were all for the most part programmed,
Right.
like it was on music executives that were deciding what country music was going to be on the radio, what
Yeah.
what rap songs are going to get played on the radio, what pop music was going to get played on the radio,
Right.
whatever. And same thing with cable TV and everything.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
so everything was curated universally,
Mhm. Mhm.
so because American culture and American tradition, it's not really it's not really founded on anything concrete,
Right.
and I guess the whole reason that I would say it's really important to understand America as being British but not British, that we broke with the UK,
Mhm.
but we maintained the semblance of British culture,
Mhm.
but we refuse to admit it to this day.
Right. Right.
You
Right.
know, and I think that's one of the reasons that America is really kind of confused,
Mhm.
in a
Mhm.
way that a lot of other countries aren't.
Right. We have a little bit of schizophrenia going on.
Yeah, man, and in many ways, I think that people will try to say that they'll target the black community, and they'll say that the black community is in an identity crisis.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I guess the thing that I would argue is, no, they're Americans, you know. Like
Right.
and
Exactly.
and this is the thing, like the Irish, when the Irish came to America,
Mhm.
the Irish were persecuted in Ireland. If you went to mass in Ireland up
Mhm.
until like the I don't know, like the late 19th century, or I don't know, maybe the early 20th century,
Mhm.
you'd be killed. The British would
Mhm.
either kill you, or they would capture you and send
Mhm.
you to be an indentured servant somewhere.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
and the British would capture the Irish and remove them from their farmland, because the
Right.
British wanted to raise cows there.
Right.
So and what the British did was they persecuted Irish culture.
Mhm.
They would trample on the pubs,
Mhm.
trample on the churches, trample on everything, and
Mhm.
and then they would forcibly scatter the Irish across the world.
Right.
The Irish didn't come to America because they wanted to. It was
Right.
a blessing to the Irish that they came here,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
they would have preferred to stay in Ireland. Yeah,
Right. Right.
um, and so I think that's one of the reasons that the Irish, I think, coming to America, were very very culturally confused,
Mm-hmm.
in many ways,
Mm-hmm.
and if you look at the Irish have always been very, very wild in America, and very, very kind of untethered to any tradition except for their religion,
Right. Right. Right.
and
Right. Yes. Yes. Yeah. I was just, yeah, yeah, you could say that. You probably say that about Italians too.
yes,
The thing that holds them together is the religious their faith, you know.
right.
Um
Well, and I've come to think that the only way for you to have a very, or I think the way for you to have a very, the healthiest and most vibrant and deepest culture, the most innovative culture, truly the most progressive culture, is for the summit of it to be your religion, you
mhm,
know, and
mhm.
then for that to be the principle of unity, for that to be the high point, and everything else emanates from there,
Right.
and if you make political ideology the summit of the culture, which unfortunately I think that's what's happening in America today,
Mhm.
or if you make race the summit of the culture, the summit of the society, then it becomes a very vapid place,
Yes. Yeah.
you know.
Well, that could lead into another discussion, for another episode, which is the whole question of, this country being, we talk about Anglophone, and then talk about the Latin, or the French and Spanish.
Mhm.
But that would be the question of, uh, a more Germanic versus Latin cultural
Yes.
dynamic that we have, right? Is America, the Protestant work ethic, its desires are driven by its economic and political, pursuits, or whether it's driven more by social, and familial pursuits, and the notion of piety, right? Which is,
Yes.
seems to be more within the Latin tradition. But yeah, man,
Yeah,
this was a great
I kind of
conversation.
feel like we went all over the place, but I
Oh
had a
no,
good time.
no, yeah, no, it's okay. We tried to keep it within bounds, in the range. So yeah, man. Okay. Well, yeah.
Let me read. Let me read real fast.
Mhm,
The From the Declaration of Independence.
mhm,
I think there's the line that everyone is pretty familiar with. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
mhm,
Um, and then it continues on that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed.
mhm,
That whenever any government, that when any that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Now, so what we can garner from that is that the that the institution of government in the American tradition, right?
mhm,
And I think we can kind of extrapolate from Christendom, from the Christian tradition,
mhm,
is that the government is subordinate to the natural law.
mhm,
Now, if you look at the very beginning of the Declaration of Independence,
mhm,
prior to the paragraph I just read,
mhm,
so this is the very beginning of it. It says,
mhm,
when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve their political bands which have connected them with another, and to
mhm,
assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions I'm sorry, a decent respect to the opinions, of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. So what they're saying here is that they're pointing out that there is a natural law that all are subject to, every human being, every government, whatever, and that when a government or when one group of people transgresses the rights of another group of people, that group of people have a responsibility. The ones that are being transgressed, trampled upon, they have a responsibility to articulate the fact that they're being trampled on. They have a responsibility to make known that they're being transgressed against, and that they have an intention to do something about it. And do something about it might be in the form of addressing it directly, or it might be severing ties with those other people or that government in this case. And I think that's a really important lesson for us to kind of maybe settle on is that the government does not have a divine right to rule.
Right.
No government does.
Right.
It's the natural law that governs us, and it's the natural law that we're to hold ourselves to and hold other people to, and that we're to hold our governments to.
Right. Yeah. That's the higher objective right there. Yeah. Okay. Well, we got our American history in for today, bro. I think.
Yeah, man. Yeah. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, me too, man. We can keep going with this. So yeah, let's do it again, bro.
Yeah, man. Definitely sounds good.
All right, brother. Good talking to you.
You too.
All right.